This Hitched to Homicide episode deals with the subject of incest. Listener discretion is advised.
In the early morning hours of June 30th, 1964, police were called to an upscale Florida apartment where they found a 69-year-old multimillionaire lying in a pool of his own blood. He'd been stabbed 39 times, and his skull was shattered. The person who discovered him? His glamorous wife, Candy. But as investigators dug deeper, what they uncovered shocked even the most seasoned detectives. A sordid web of deceit, a secret affair, and an incestuous relationship that would dominate headlines for months. The Miami Herald would later call the trial a phantasmagoria of sex and slaughter. And 61 years later, no one has been held accountable for the murder. This is Blood, Money, and Incest, the story of Jacques and Candy Mossler. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends over there in Japan.
Yes.
Yokoso, yokoso, yokoso.
Ohio gozaimasu.
There you go. Perfect.
Wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe to Hitched to Homicide, then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who like true crime can find us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you want true crime with us all the time, please join our closed Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws.
Yes.
Go to Facebook and type in H2H, In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a few questions and you are in. So go join.
Yes.
I post photos and other information in there as well. And this week I've got all kinds of photos of these interesting folks.
Nice.
It's a great group of people. You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And we have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee or me a Diet Mountain Dew. Just saying, you can find that link in our show notes. You can also send us a text, and the link to that is at the top of the show notes where it says, send Chris and Rob a text.
Please do.
I am pulling this one from the vault.
Okay. Because
it's the 61st anniversary of this murder.
Oh.
It was 2 days ago, June 30th.
All right.
Yeah. So it's an incredibly interesting case. It's a little bit crazy. And I just wanted to pull this one out from the vault. Somebody asked me about this case the other day on the street. Oh. And I was like, you know what? We should pull that one out of the vault this summer because that's what we're doing a little bit of this summer just because everybody's traveling and we're traveling. And it just makes good sense to bring some of the good ones back.
All right.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. Texas Monthly, The Notorious Mrs. Mossler by Skip Hollinsworth, Court TV's and Dominic Dunn's Power, Privilege, and Justice, the San Francisco Examiner, the Houston Chronicle, the New York Times, South Florida Sun Sentinel, the Miami New Times, the Miami News, Time Magazine, Medium.com, Find a Grave, Crime Library, and the American Law Library. There's tons out there about this case.
All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Jacques Mossler was actually born in Romania, May 5th, 1896.
Okay.
Jacques immigrated with his Jewish parents and two brothers to the United States, where his parents changed their last name to Mossler. And his family lived in Buffalo, New York, and then they moved to Chicago. And the records back then are a little sketchy. It's 1800s, early 1900s.
Okay.
And I've read different accounts of his early life. When Jacques is 13, his father dies, and he quits school and becomes a newspaper boy to help pay the bills. Then he starts loan sharking. It just made me think of
Goodfellas.
Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Remember how he quit school and then they beat up the mailman and say don't send any more truancy letters to his parents.
Yep. One of my favorite movies.
But he starts loan sharking. Then he gets a job in the finance department at a car dealership. He eventually found his way to New Orleans. And when he makes it there, he's still a really young man, but he opens a used car dealership. And I read where he was known to cut corners, to turn a profit at the car lot.
A used car?
Never.
I'm sorry. Anybody that's a used car salesman, I apologize. It's an old joke. It's like a lawyer's joke. So don't send me emails.
Well, I think things have changed a little bit at used car lots from back then to now.
True.
But I found the charter, the organization of his corporation, Mossler Auto Exchange, in the September 5th, 1918 New Orleans Herald, where he set up shop at 421 Baronne Street. And in 1918, you could imagine what the used cars look like. They're not even new cars.
Well, I was going to say.
They're used.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And his tagline was, the choicest bargains always. We make the best offer because we are an independent concern. See our line before you buy any car. Those taglines were a little longer back then.
Yeah, exactly.
At some point between 1914 and 1918, Jacques serves in the U.S. Army. It's World War I. And while he's there, his brothers run the car business. And after he returns home, he sells his dealership and starts opening small loan companies.
Okay.
And this is kind of where he finds his niche. The war's over. Everybody wants a car. He's the guy. And they need to finance that car. And he goes into consumer credit, opening 40 credit companies and banks to loan people money for cars and appliances and things like that.
Okay.
Now, his new slogan is shorter. We are the Yes Bank.
It's pretty much to the point.
Because when others would turn people down, he would not. And the credit companies will eventually be located not only in Chicago, but New Orleans, South Florida, Miami-Dade area, and Houston. Now, the average person could get a loan with Jacques, but it came with an exceptionally high interest rate. In the 1920s, Jacques marries his longtime girlfriend, Evelyn, and they have 4 daughters and are married for about 20 years or so. But in 1947, after the girls are pretty much grown, these two divorce. And it's at this point that Jacques Mossler is a very wealthy bachelor. He now owned the Coral Gables First National Bank, the Central Bank of North Dade and Miami Central Bank and Trust Company, and he'd moved to Texas. He had a 15-room mansion in Houston, a vacation house in Galveston, a ranch in rural Texas, an apartment in Chicago, and another in Miami.
Man.
Jacques is a self-made man, and he's got more money than a gin joint's got broken dreams.
I wonder where he got the money to begin with to start opening these credit banks and things.
I don't know. I mean, I think he parlayed everything from his used car lot over.
Okay.
And he started the used car lot because he was loan sharking.
Okay.
So that's sort of the progression of that.
All right. Okay.
So hold that thought about Jacques. Meet Candace Grace Candy Weatherby. Now, she's never, throughout this entire story or her entire life, going to tell the truth about her age. Yeah. She's a woman after my own heart. She's born on February 18th, 1920, or 1918, or 1917, depending on what record you want to look at, in Buchanan, Georgia, just west of Atlanta. Okay. And she's number 6 of 12 kids.
Wow.
Her parents are Leonidas Shields, Lonnie or Lon, that's what he went by, Weatherby, and Elizabeth Savannah, Lizzie Brannon Weatherby. When she's a little girl, Candy knew how to get attention. One of the ways she went about that was by wearing nightgowns everywhere.
What?
Including to church.
Okay.
And when she was asked about it, she said she liked feeling like a princess. That is never going to go away for Candy.
Okay.
Candy's mom will die giving birth to a baby girl in 1932 when Candy is 12 or 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
Her parents are farmers and members of the Mormon faith. They didn't have a telephone or even a radio. The kids did chores. They planted crops. They picked cotton. They collected eggs from the chicken coop. Kind of sounds like my grandmother's life.
Yeah.
It was a small town. It was a small town in Georgia. And it's in the middle of the Depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Candy is what you would consider back then a blue-eyed Southern belle. She spoke with a little girl voice. So think Kristen Chenoweth.
Okay.
She was small, and she had big boobs, and she always had her hair fixed, and she always made sure she was blonde.
Okay.
Now, I read where she seemed like she was lifted straight from the pages of a play by Tennessee Williams because she was fragile, needy, charming, bubbly, manipulative, and all too aware of her effect on others, especially the menfolk. After her mother dies, her father becomes an alcoholic and leaves the 12 kids. They're split up between relatives to be raised. And just a month after school of her senior year, Candy drops out. And her grandfather encouraged her to start looking for a husband because that's what you do.
Yeah.
She needed a man who could take care of her. And Candy's grandfather was a bishop in the Mormon church, so it wouldn't be uncommon for her to get married young, especially in the 30s, in the 1930s.
Yeah, everybody got married young then.
Candy is introduced to Norman Johnson. He's a family friend and a civil engineer, and he's 10 years older than she is.
How old is she right now?
She's 18.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on what you believe.
Okay.
She's 18 years old.
All right.
He lived in Anniston, Alabama, about 50 miles west of Buchanan, Georgia. In 1939, when Candy is 19 years old, they marry and settle in Anniston. Just a year later, Candy gives birth to a son, Norman Jr. Now, Candy wasn't much of a stay-at-home mom. I get that, Candy. I was a better mom because I worked.
Right.
And to get out of the house, she started volunteering with the military support group, United Service Organizations. She and other women helped to host parties for soldiers at Fort Benning, Georgia, which was about 120 miles south of Anniston. And it just so happened at one of these parties that she helped to host, she met a young Army officer named Winthrop Rockefeller,
Winthrop.
the son of New York industrialist John D. Rockefeller. She's aiming high.
Yep.
Now, before Winthrop is shipped overseas to fight in World War II, he and Candy become really, really close.
Okay.
So close that when Candy has a daughter, Rita, in 1943, she gives her the middle name Rockefeller.
Oh, a girl with the... Okay.
Middle name, Rita Rockefeller.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's going to make people think at some point that Rita
Yeah.
is actually Winthrop's baby.
Right.
I don't think that's true. The reason why is because if she believed it was his baby, she would have gone to the Rockefellers and talked to him.
Yeah.
That's the type of person that Candy is.
Right.
No one really knows if her husband Norman ever knew that she had this special relationship with Winthrop, but it didn't matter because in the mid-1940s, they all moved to New Orleans, where her husband Norman landed a new engineering job at a shipyard. And not long after this, the marriage starts to fall apart, and Norman goes west, eventually making a life for himself in Boulder, Colorado. And Candy stayed in New Orleans with their 2 children.
I have my New Orleans shirt on.
Well, isn't that just coinkadinkle? Coinky-dink.
I just thought I'd throw that in.
Now, Candy really liked using her southern, slow, velvet drawl of an accent. Honey, sugar pie, sweetheart. Hi, y'all.
Always works on me.
It worked on you.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. She always had her hair perfectly coiffed. I've got mine done today. Her shoes, her purse, they always matched. She wore really high heels, and she liked turning heads. And she very much had a personality type of like a Marilyn Monroe.
I don't know if I want to hear the rest of this story.
It's all downhill from here. Candy decides that she's going to be a fashion model, and she finds all these gigs modeling clothes and lingerie for local department stores. And she also dabbled in designing some lingerie. Apparently, at one point, she took her kids to her sister's home and hopped a train to New York City, where she attended classes at the Barbizon School of Modeling. So she's got these two kids. She starts modeling. She's like, maybe I can do something with this. I'm going to shuttle my kids off, and I'm going to go up to New York and go to school. And that's what she did.
All right.
When Candy comes back to New Orleans, she opens the Candy Modeling and Self-Improvement School on Peniston Street near the Garden District in New Orleans. The name of the school is going to change a lot over the years. She places ads in the newspaper, and she promises to advise young ladies on makeup and hairstyling and tips on maintaining, quote, a streamlined figure, end quote. She also said she's going to teach them how to model and do fashion shows and give them, quote, self-confidence, grace, poise, and elegance of speech that will make you a person of real distinction, end quote.
Okay.
She had little seminars on how to properly wear a hat. One Easter Sunday, she had a fashion parade on Canal Street with a marching band and 45 of her modeling students parading the street.
Wow.
Go big or go home.
Exactly. You're right.
Now, there's also a little rumor that Candy had to earn money in other ways while she was living in New Orleans. The rumor was that Candy was an escort. And it was even said that maybe she might have run an entire outfit of sex workers, like she was a madam.
Right.
Young soldiers would come back from war. They'd show up at her house and sign up for dance classes. I've got my air quotes up.
Yeah.
And each guy was paired with a female partner. They danced for a little bit, and then they would retire to one of the bedrooms. And a soldier could use his GI Bill benefits to pay for his, quote, lessons.
His dance lessons.
And this rumor that she and her girls have been passed around like cornbread at the family reunion, well, it's going to come back later in her life to bite her in the butt.
All right.
But Candy is a woman not to be messed with. She's on a mission. She wanted money and notoriety. She gets involved in the art scene as a volunteer with the New Orleans Opera. She told the opera executives that she would be more than happy to meet with prominent businessmen and ask for donations. And I can see her saying, look, honey, we need your money for the opera. And the executives at the Opera House of New Orleans said, you bet your boots we want you going in and asking people for money with your big blonde hair and your really tall shoes and your cute little outfits that always match.
Yeah.
And one day she showed up to see New Orleans banker Jacques Mossler. Candy is 27 in 1947 when she walks in and meets 52-year-old Jacques. Or is she 29?
Yeah.
Like Candy, Jacques was also recently divorced. He had left his wife of nearly 30 years, Evelyn. Now, there's a story that said that Candy had written down in her book that she was going to try to get $350 out of Jacques for the opera during their meeting. And when she meets him, Jacques tells Candy that opera is boring. But he wrote her a check for $25. Now, a few weeks later, Candy has her children at the Audubon Zoo, and they just so happen to pass by Jacques. You want to know why?
Why?
Because it's a known fact that Jacques would take a walk there every day on his lunch break.
Ah.
So you think Candy planned that, or she
No,
planned that
no,
meet
no.
cute? Yeah.
No.
They run into each other, they start dating, and 2 years later, in 1949, while on a trip in May to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Jacques and Candy get married.
Wow.
When they get home to New Orleans after their wedding, they start packing everything up. Jacques is going to establish a new headquarters for his business in the booming business area of Houston, Texas. And in the 1950s, Houston is full of money. There are oil men everywhere. On 3 acres on Willow Wick Drive in River Oaks, Jacques builds Candy her dream home. A 3-story red brick mansion staffed with maids, cooks, butlers, gardeners, handymen, and even a chauffeur.
Wow.
Which they needed for the 7-car garage filled with really expensive cars.
Dag.
These two began doing what they did best. Jacques was making money, and Candy started making friends and climbing her way up the social ladder of Houston, Texas. She wrote lots of checks to lots of different worthy causes. She threw fundraisers at her home, and plenty of people attended just to get a glimpse of this Candy chick. So all these Houston socialites are talking, and they're like, have you met her? Have you met her? Well, she's giving a party. Well, I'm going because I want to see her. And apparently, she went from room to room in her 4-inch heels, greeting all of her guests with a kiss on the cheek.
Wow.
And she loved being in Texas. And Jacques gave Candy a monthly allowance of $5,700 to manage the house. And he would add bonuses of $5,000 for her birthday, their wedding anniversary, and other special occasions.
She sounds like an employee.
Nothing says love like cash.
Jeez.
Now, the old guard of Houston, they knew nothing about her, but they thought Candy was fun and threw a hell of a party, and no one wanted to miss a good party. Besides, they wanted to be there so they could talk about her later.
Yeah.
But those rumors of her life as a madam or a dance lesson matchmaker in New Orleans comes up. Southern women have a way of chit-chatting amongst themselves, and these stories made their way to Houston. And Candy overlooked all of it and just worked harder in their social circles. She volunteered at lots of hospitals, and she worked with the Boys Club, which I thought was interesting. She worked with the Boys Club.
Okay.
Can you imagine these young boys when she comes walking in her high heels and her just Kristen Chenoweth voice and her perfectly coiffed hair?
I'm sure it didn't affect them at all.
And then, in January 1957, Jacques called Candy from a business trip in Chicago to tell her he had just read about a terrible tragedy. A man named Leonard Glenn had shot his pregnant wife and stabbed and killed their unborn child. He left behind 4 orphaned kids. Daniel, age 5, Edward, 2, Martha, 6, and Christopher was only 4. And Jacques calls Candy and says, "We need to adopt these children." And Candy boards a flight to Chicago, and she and Jacques sign custody papers for all 4 kiddos. Wow. Now, a lot of strings had to be pulled. And I want to say, Candy kind of liked this because she wanted to have children with Jacques. But when he was this rich bachelor after he left his wife, he had a vasectomy. So he couldn't have any more kids. And Candy was really upset about that. Now, as you might imagine, this story is picked up by The Wire, and it's printed in newspapers from coast to coast. One of the headlines was, quote, "Day of tragedy for children gives way to fairy tale life." And when Candy and Jacques walked off the plane at Houston International Airport with the orphan children, the cameras were flashing, and Candy was camera ready.
I'm sure she was.
She wore a black dress and black pumps, and I read that she became one of the most famous women in Houston and a favorite subject of journalists. And quite frankly, the list of prestigious organizations which she raised money for was long. She was also an active member at the First Presbyterian Church of Houston, and she always arrived early on Sunday, decked out. So somewhere along the way, she has left the Mormon Church.
Okay.
She liked having fun with the kids. She would turn their ballroom into a giant playroom. She had her chauffeur take the kids to drive-in movies, bowling alleys, to the ranch in Galveston, their beach home. She and Jacques arranged for a baseball field to be built on the lot across from their home.
Oh, jeez.
According to Candy, her children were everything to her. And she's living a seemingly idyllic life. And Jacques is generous, not just to his wife and adopted children, but to his employees, because he set up these pension funds. He had a foundation to help pay for the education of his employees. And he liked handing out newly minted Kennedy $50. When was the last time you saw a Kennedy $50?
I have a few.
Well, that's because we're old, honey. My dad has a bunch of them. But I like for younger kids who don't even use cash,
that's
true. They're paying with their phone. They're probably like, what's a Kennedy $50?
Well, actually, it's probably worse. They'd probably go, who's Kennedy?
Hopefully not. Hopefully, U.S. history class has taught them a few things. In 1961, Candy gets a phone call from her older sister, Elizabeth Powers. She goes by Babe, and Babe is asking for help. Her 20-year-old son, Mel, had been thrown in jail. And here's the 411 on Mel. Melvin Lane Powers is born on January 13th, 1942 in Birmingham, Alabama. See how I did that?
Yeah, that was nice.
His parents are Garrett Ace Powers and Elizabeth Babe Powers. What great names, Ace and Babe. We're going over to Ace and Babe's house.
I know. I've got a boring first name, Rob.
Chris and Rob. I know people don't even know if I'm a girl half the time. I get mail addressed to Mr. Chris Calvert.
Oh, man.
But Mel's dad owns a small commercial aviation service. Mel had been expelled from school for excessive absenteeism. He never graduated high school, and to make a living, he sold magazine subscriptions. He was in the Navy. He moved to Pontiac, Michigan, where he served 90 days in jail for swindling. And during a work trip to Michigan, he persuaded an 89-year-old man to buy $20,000 worth of worthless stock in fake magazines.
Jeez.
And Mel was convicted of fraud and sent to jail for 90 days. Now, he's still on probation when he moves to Houston in 1961 because Babe is like, please, can we move Mel to your place? He needs a new life. He needs to start fresh.
Right.
And the newspapers will later call Mel, quote, movie star handsome, end quote. I don't know about that. I've seen the pictures. I'm going to show everybody the pictures. He was 6'4", had jet black hair, chiseled features. He had some acne scars on his face, though. And Candy invited Mel to live with her and her husband, Jacques, and their 4 adopted children. And Jacques gives Mel a job as a repossessor at one of his loan companies. Makes sense.
Sure.
He's a strong guy.
Right.
Candy gives Mel his own bedroom and a Thunderbird. And Mel turned out to be good at his job, but while he's living under the roof with Jacques, Candy and the 4 adopted kids, Candy helps Mel improve himself. He undergoes 4 operations, and it's assumed that it was Candy who wanted this done. He is circumcised. His tonsils are removed. His ears are cosmetically adjusted to lie flat against his head, and the acne scars on his face are sanded.
Wow.
Personally, I don't think these are anything that a man would do on his own without being asked by a woman.
Yeah.
You want me to what? Pin my ears back? You want me at what as a grown man to get circumcised? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm thinking I'd have to draw the line there.
But Mel is living the high life. By the spring of 1963, Candy is taking that newly sanded face and acceptably pinned back ears and circumcised appendage for a ride, and not in the Thunderbird.
Oh, man.
Mel and Candy are having an incestuous affair. That's her nephew.
Wow.
And have been for a couple of years.
Really?
They're writing love letters, having sex, and they're not even being that quiet about it because just like Downton Abbey, when you have a lot of servants in the house, there are no secrets
Right.
in the house.
Yeah.
And the staff starts talking and saying that over time, the relationship between Candy and Jacques had fizzled. But the relationship between Candy and her nephew, Mel, had
sizzled.
Right on cue, baby. Right on cue.
I swear we don't know what each other's going to say.
We just share a brain at this point. Half the time we dress alike and don't even know it. So
true.
What am I going to say? In October of 1964, a maid tells Jacques, look, your wife is sleeping with her nephew. And in a rage, he searches the house for his wife's diary. Quote, my darling, the image of your face is before me. I can almost feel your face against mine. I could not think of life without you. I love you. I need you. I long for you. End quote.
Whoa.
And that's not to her husband. That was from Candy to Mel.
I was going to say.
She's 41 or 43. Who knows? And he's 20. She's Cougar Candy.
Yep.
Jacques goes to an attorney. He's going to sue for alienation of affection. But the attorney tells Jacques, don't do it. Because the publicity alone is not going to be worth it.
Right.
And what would he gain out of it? And he tells Jacques, just get Mel the hell out of your life. So he evicts Mel out of the house and he fires him from his job.
Wow.
And Jacques has his own security guards escort Mel off the property. And Mel says, quote, I'll be back and you'll regret this as the longest day of your life, end quote.
That can't be good.
That's called foreshadowing. You knew that was coming. You knew it.
I was ready.
After Mel is gone, Jacques leaves Houston for his luxury apartment / condo on Key Biscayne, where he's going to live for the next 9 months without Candy. He's just like, I got to get away from Houston. Everybody knows, all the staff knows. So if the staff knows, the staff at the other houses know as well, right?
Sure.
So he's like, I'm getting away. Meanwhile, if anyone asked, Candy told them that Mel had gone to start his own business. That's why he left. And Jacques was in Florida because he was opening another bank in Miami. And she and Jacques were getting along just fine. And she and some of their children would be visiting Jacques in Florida soon. Now let's talk about the prenup between Candy and Jacques. Candy signed one that said if she filed for divorce from Jacques, she would only get $200,000. And Jacques knew that if he filed for divorce, she would get half of his $33 million fortune.
Wow.
But if Jacques dies, Candy gets
everything. Yeah.
Yeah, what is it that Ivana Trump said? Don't get even, get everything.
Yeah. Yep.
And just so you know, with inflation, $33 million in today's money would be almost $446 million.
Wow.
If my math is correct. In October of 1963, after Mel's been kicked out of the house and Jacques living in Florida, Jacques took steps to revise his will and kept notes on telephone conversations that he overheard. In a memo in his own private diary, he wrote, quote, if Mel and Candy don't kill me first, I'll have to kill them, end quote.
Wow.
It's now June of 1964. The kids are out of school in Houston, and Candy and the kids make their way to Florida. Got to keep up appearances.
Yep.
And after she makes it to Florida with the kids, Candy seems to enjoy her family time, but I think Jacques steered pretty clear of her. Mm-hmm. But at night, Candy kept making these trips to the hospital to be treated with a shot for her migraine headaches. And she would always take the children with her in the middle of the night. So here's sort of a backstory on that. Candy wanted bigger breasts. They were big to begin with. She wanted to be Dolly Parton, and she got them. Like, she was even compared to Dolly. Okay. But she didn't get silicone implants. She got silicone injections. Oh. So straight into her breast tissue.
Good Lord.
So that's some silicone toxicity.
Yeah.
And who knows what else she had done back then.
Right.
When she went to the hospital, she would take the kids. She'd put them in her convertible. They'd drive all of them to the hospital for her shot in the emergency room. And sometimes she would run errands in the middle of the night with her children. What is open in 1964 in Florida in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
And 3 times in the previous week in June, she'd made after midnight visits to the ER for sedatives. I want you to remember that. She's getting sedatives for her migraine headaches.
Okay.
Now, on the afternoon of the 29th of June, Mel arrived at the Houston airport and bought himself a one-way ticket to Miami, Florida. Then, according to a flight attendant, Mel was only carrying a briefcase. He had no luggage. At about 7 o'clock that night, he went to the Stuffed Shirt Lounge. It was a bar and a Holiday Inn that's on the Miami side of the Rickenbacker Causeway that leads to Key Biscayne, and just a few miles from Jacques' apartment. He ordered a scotch, and he asked for a large Coke bottle, empty.
Okay.
At around 12:30, 1 a.m., he returned to the Stuffed Shirt, ordered a double scotch, and asked for another Coke bottle. These Coke bottles, he's asking for them empty. He's asking for them because the car he is driving is low on gas, and he needs gas, and he's going to use these empty Coke bottles to siphon gas from Jacques' car to make sure he had enough fuel in his car.
Okay.
I don't want to say getaway car, but in his car.
In his car.
Meanwhile, as the 29th of June rolls into June 30th, 1964, she's got a migraine. She loaded up the kids. She headed to the hospital at 1:20 a.m. At about 1:45, in the dark of the early morning, a neighbor of Jacques, Mrs. Irene Durr, the manager of the Governor's Lodge apartments where they lived, hears a dog barking frantically outside his apartment. She's awakened by this barking dog, and the neighbors will say they heard a man say, quote, "I'm bringing him in," end quote.
Okay.
Later in the night, These same folks notice a tall, husky man walking through the parking lot. Then they watch him get into a white Chevrolet and drive away with its lights off. No one calls the police. Other neighbors tell a different story, that about 2 a.m. they hear, quote, don't do this to me. It's you, end quote. When Candy and the children come back at 4:30 in the morning, the apartment is a bloody mess.
Wow.
Jacques is lying dead in a pool of blood on the floor. His skull had been bashed in with an orange ceramic swan, and he'd been stabbed 39 times.
Oh.
The family dog, a boxer named Rocky, was tied to a doorknob in the kitchen.
Wow, and he just has to kind of sit there and look at the whole scene.
Yeah, poor Rocky.
Don't do that to the dog.
Yeah, not the dog.
Yeah.
When Candy finds her dead husband, she calls Mrs. Durr, the woman who heard the barking of Rocky, and Mrs. Durr calls Dr. John Handworker, a Key Biscayne doctor. And Dr. Handworker was called just before 5 a.m., and when he gets there, Jacques' dead body has been covered with a blanket, and he calls the police. Now, at the same time at Miami Airport at 5 a.m., Mel is buying a one-way ticket back to Houston, and he's left a white car, a car that's registered in the name of Jacques' company and is signed out by Candy.
Oh.
Leaves it in the airport parking lot.
Really?
When the police arrive, Candy is dressed and ready to receive guests. Now, remember, she's been at the hospital, she's gotten a sedative, and she has a migraine headache. So I get migraine headaches. Would I be dressed and ready to receive guests with a migraine headache, sweetheart? Or taking medicine for a migraine?
No, you'd be in the bedroom with all the curtains shut and an ice pack on your
Yes,
forehead.
I would, on my head.
Yeah.
Now, detectives at the Dade County Sheriff's Department have asked Candy what she thinks might have happened. And what Candy says is that she believes a burglar or a business rival or perhaps a lover might have killed her husband. But the authorities do a little more digging around and discover when they arrived, the widow was dressed to receive guests and she was as charming as always. And to boot, Candy's nephew Mel was kicked out of their home in Houston after everybody discovered these two were having an affair.
Right.
And police are wondering, who's this Mel guy?
Right.
And they also find out as the heiress to Jacques' company, Candy would now be worth about $400 million in today's money.
Sure.
Motive. Jacques' autopsy showed the many stab wounds, but also numerous defense wounds on his hands and arms. Jacques died fighting. He fought to the very end. Almost 250 people attended Jacques' funeral on July 2nd, 1964 at Riverside Memorial Chapel on Miami Beach. Candy's in the front row and cries, surrounded by her children. After that, she and the kids fly to Washington, D.C., where Jacques would be laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery because he was a World War I veteran. After the funeral, police search the apartment, and they find all kinds of letters and photographs of Mel and Candy together.
Okay.
All things that point to Candy sleeping with her nephew.
Right.
And what does Candy do? She checks herself into a Houston hospital, St. Luke's, suffering from what her doctor called, quote, nervous strain, end quote. Outside the door of her hospital room, were two private security guards. Like somebody's coming after her.
Okay.
Then, get this, while wearing a pink negligee, she gives interviews from her bedside at the hospital. She denies the rumors of an illicit romance with her nephew, Mel. And when a reporter asks if she thinks Mel killed her husband, she replies, quote, "Oh, pooh, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. If an atomic bomb were to fall, Mel would have been the first one to drag Jacques and the children out of the wreckage," end quote.
Okay.
She said the affair rumor was absurd. And as for the photo of the two of them together, or all the photos of the two of them together, they were with a group of friends at a nightclub when it was taken. And the letter she had written, Candy explained that was the way she wrote to everybody among her family and her friends. Quote, "Why, I call everybody darling," end quote.
Nice try.
I do call a lot of people darling. So don't take, if I call you that, don't take offense. But a reporter asked if she was worried that she might be arrested. And Candy tossed a hand over her mouth and trembled, quote, "How can something like this happen in this country? I don't know how they can do this. I guess some people could cast reflections on Jesus Christ himself," end quote.
Good grief. Wow.
You can't make her up as a
No.
fictional character.
No.
The newspapers ran a picture of Candy and Mel holding hands at the Sun Valley Ski Resort in Idaho. The police confiscated other photographs and a bunch of love letters in Candy's handwriting. And here are some of the quotes from those letters. Quote, "You mean the whole world to me, and I love and want you more than I can tell you. You are everything to me, darling. My love and kisses for you," end quote.
Wow. If she said that to everybody, like she said,
Yeah.
we got an issue here.
Well, one had a P.S., and it was, quote, "It is cold here. I'd like you to keep me ever so warm," end quote. That's me. I'm like, can I put my cold feet on you, Rob?
As my feet are hanging out from underneath the covers.
Honey, my feet are cold. Can I put my feet on you? I don't say it like Candy does. Maybe I should.
Usually it's prefaced with, "Hey, stop snoring."
Detectives consulted a handwriting expert, but the letters were signed C. Mossler. I mean, she could have just signed them with a C, but she put her last name in there.
Gosh.
So here's what they have besides all the letters showing that Candy and Mel are getting it on. There was no forced entry into the condominium, so it was either someone that he knew or someone that had a key. The condominium had been cleaned earlier that day, but they do find some fingerprints and a palm print that doesn't belong to Candy or Jacques. And what about Mel? Well, when authorities question the staff in Houston, police find out that Mel had threatened Jacques when he left. They go to Mel's apartment in Houston, where he moved after he was kicked out. They're looking for the smoking gun, and what they find is blood spots on the clothes he was wearing when he flew from Houston to Miami.
Oops.
And in the white car that was checked out by Candy, more blood spots. And they find a palm print in the apartment.
Right.
It matched Mel.
Wow.
They find more love letters. Jesus, how many letters are they writing to each other? That were after Mel had moved out. Quote, "I like the pictures you sent of yourself with the gold sweater on. I became so hot just looking at your breasts pushing up against those cross straps. You don't have to be concerned about anyone. Only you, my love. You are the one for me. I was in the bathtub and I just laid back and was with you very, very close. You are my God. I'd do anything for your love," end quote.
Okay. Okay.
Mel's got Riz.
Yeah.
What the young kids now call Riz. He's
Yeah.
got some Riz.
Wow.
But then other people start coming forward. A ticket agent at the airport knows these two. She remembers Candy buying a ticket with Mel, and she was wearing only a fur coat and heels. Only a fur coat and heels.
She didn't have anything else on?
No, underneath she's
Whoa.
naked.
Wow.
And police think they have more than enough evidence, and Mel is arrested a day after Jacques' funeral and charged with murder. And prosecutors think, we got a slam dunk. Here we go. This is going to be big. This is easy. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Yep.
For the next year, the prosecution gets to work, and Candy spends loads of time with her kids and their governess and Mel in Rochester, Minnesota, where she rents an adjoining apartment and makes appointments at the Mayo Clinic for her migraine headaches. She lays low and only gives one interview to the Miami Herald investigative reporter Gene Miller. She tells him that Jacques had become, quote, unstable in the last months of his life and that he had been getting love letters written on pink stationery from a man who had also tried to blackmail him for $75,000, end quote. So she's setting up Jacques.
Sure.
She tells this reporter in June of 1965 that she traveled with her kids to Arlington National Cemetery to commemorate the first anniversary of Jacques' death. They knelt down by Jacques' grave and placed roses by his tombstone. And a professional photographer who was hired by Candy herself took loads of photos. And they were sent out to all the wire services along with a typed statement that talked all about Candy's medical issues. And in the statement that she released, along with the photographs, Candy said the doctors advised her not to travel, but she was not going to be kept away from her husband's grave because she wanted to signal to the world that, quote, Jacques Mossler is never forgotten, end quote.
She was in the wrong business. She should have been in the PR business.
She's in the candy PR business.
Yeah, jeez.
Candy keeps saying that she really loves Jacques and that she didn't care about his money. Quote, I would have been happy with him in a telephone booth, end quote.
Sure.
But during all this time, Mel is sitting in jail, and Candy is determined to get Mel the best defense team her dead husband's money can buy. And his name is Percy Foreman. Then, as the authorities find more and more evidence for the prosecution, such as 4 witnesses who claimed the lovers solicited a hit on the old mooch, which is what Mel called Jacques. He called him the old mooch.
Yeah.
And a long list of witnesses, neighbors, employees, hotel clerks who said they saw Mel and Candy share affectionate moments. Cops found a photographic record of Candy and Mel's travels, souvenir snapshots from nightclubs, ski slopes, concerts. Candy's also indicted on murder charges a year after Mel.
Really?
Candy has to hire her own attorneys now.
Wow.
So enter Clyde Woody and Marion Rosen. They all work together. And Candy's attorneys tell her to fly to Miami and surrender herself to the police. And when she surrenders in Miami, there are reporters there. She's all dressed up. And when she's asked by a reporter what she has to say, she bats her eyes and says, quote, well, sir, nobody's perfect,
Yeah.
end quote.
It's like Chicago.
Nobody's perfect.
Oh, jeez.
Her position from the beginning is that she's innocent and that it's nothing. She agrees to stay in jail because her attorneys tell her it's better for the case. And she spends 14 days in the Dade County lockup where there are no Christian Dior or pearls. And when she's released, she blows kisses and waves goodbye to the other inmates while they are shouting insults at her. You plankin', bitch.
Wow.
Candy loved being a celebrity. She loved giving interviews. And this case had everything the press wanted. A dead wealthy husband, a beautiful wife having an affair with her nephew. This is Candy, pun intended, to the media.
Yeah.
And you'd think that just like the prosecution believes, it's going to be a slam dunk, open and shut. Candy's cheating on Mel. Mel's got blood on his clothes. They have motive. Not so fast.
Really?
When the trial begins at the Dade County Courthouse in Miami, they're in room 6-1. It's the big courtroom. And the jury is all male. There was a Marine specimen collector, a bus driver, a mail carrier, a bellhop, a former owner of a boarding house, a piano player, and a truck driver amongst the jurors.
Okay.
February 1st, 1966, it's the opening day of testimony, and Candy arrived at the courthouse dressed in a white trench coat, a white silk dress, and white pumps. And as she stepped out of the car, photographers rushed toward her, flash bulbs popping, and the reporters are shouting questions. And according to Marion Rosen, the 31-year-old member of Candy and Mel's defense team, quote, you could have thought she was a movie star walking the red carpet, end quote.
Jeez.
Candy and her attorneys took the elevator to the 6th floor, and here's the scene. There's this long line of people waiting in the hallway behind these red velvet ropes, hoping just to get a seat in the courtroom and steal a glance of Candy. And the crowd was mostly women, many of whom, in the words of one reporter, were, quote, rushing downtown after getting the kids off to school, end quote.
Man.
This is 50 Shades of Grey for them.
Yeah.
On trial.
Wow.
As Candy walked past them, she smiled and blew kisses. So she's just blowing kisses to everybody.
Wow.
Every major newspaper and magazine publication was there, including Time, Life, Newsweek, and the Saturday Evening Post.
Jeez.
And when Candy entered the courtroom, she sat on the far left side of the defense counsel's table, and Mel sat on the far right side. And these two didn't look at each other at all. And I'm sure their attorneys were like, if you even glance over there.
I was just about ready to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Dade County lead prosecutor, Richard Gernstein, was a tall, balding, former World War II Air Force navigator who had lost his right eye after he was hit by flak during a bombing run over Germany. Rob's hero from the get-go.
Yeah.
And lots of folks believed Richard was using this incredibly publicized trial to launch his political career. Well, why not?
Sure.
He wanted to run for governor, so there's a lot at stake for both sides.
Absolutely.
Everybody's got an agenda.
Yep.
Richard Gernstein tells the jury in his opening statements that Candy seduced Mel, made him believe she was in love with him, and then persuaded him to fly to Miami and murder her husband, whom she no longer loved, while she and the children were conveniently at the hospital, giving her the perfect alibi. Quote, Mel did the dirty work, bludgeoning Jacques and stabbing him 39 times, but he was motivated by his insatiable desire for this woman, end quote. Then the lead attorney for Candy and Mel, he is 63-year-old Percy Foreman. He's a big dude with a slick back hair. He wore a ruby ring on his left pinky finger. Percy was the most renowned and outrageous criminal defense attorney in Houston. And in the courtroom, he was a brilliant orator, renowned for his opening and closing arguments, where he would quote Greek poets, Roman philosophers, Shakespeare, the Bible, and Southern say-sos. A lot like I do on the podcast.
There you go.
And if that ain't the truth, then biscuits aren't better with gravy.
There you go.
Now, Percy Foreman liked to boast that he had won acquittals for at least 300 accused murderers, many of whom had clear evidence stacked against them, and his usual strategy was to put the victim on trial. He tells the jury thousands of people hated banker Jacques Mossler. He was, quote, as ruthless in business as any pirate who ever sailed the seven seas, a man who received so many threats against his life that he kept an axe beside his bed and frequently summoned thugs and gangsters to his home, employing them to deal with blackmailers, end quote.
Wow.
This is what he's telling everyone. What he's telling Candy and Mel is that he requires a retainer of $200,000. So while he's telling the jury, he's spinning this tale for the jury, he's like, oh, this tale is going to cost you $200,000.
Wow.
And Candy put up her jewelry as collateral, and Mel put up some land that he owned. And later, when she and Mel don't pay their bills, he keeps it and sells it.
Wow.
And they try to sue Percy. As for the allegations of Jacques being a homosexual, which is what they're putting forward, Percy has zero proof to back up his allegations, and he had just as much evidence when he claimed that Jacques was consumed with sexual fetishes. Quote, every conceivable sex deviation that anybody has ever had, end quote.
Good Lord.
Percy told the jury that Jacques had an insatiable sex appetite for high school boys and college students he met in bars frequented by the gay people.
Wow. He's pulling out all the stops.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Then he said, quote, if each of the 39 wounds on the body of the deceased had been inflicted by a separate person, that is 39 different people, there still wouldn't be 3 times as many people in the state of Florida with enough reason to want the death of Jacques Mossler. I mean, he's just like everybody wanted to stab him.
Yeah.
So again, his strategy is to put the victim on trial.
Sure.
So Jacques and not Candy is the theme of Percy's defense. He insinuated that Jacques had a relationship with a male vice president of one of his companies. He called to the stand a former handyman of the Mosslers who testified that he had seen Jacques with 3 shirtless young men in a trailer at the Mosslers' Galveston beach property. Oh no, not a man without his shirt on at the beach. Seriously?
I know.
Another important point is that the judge wouldn't allow the prosecution to show a 9-page love letter that Mel wrote to Candy from prison, and Candy's diary was also ruled inadmissible. So those are huge. That's huge.
Why were they?
I have no idea.
Wow.
I have no idea.
Okay.
But there were plenty of folks who said the trial was over the moment Candy walked in and crossed her legs. She chatted with reporters during breaks. She gave interviews all the time, and she'd charmed the pants off of all of them. She also moved her children to Miami and enrolled them in school under assumed names so she could keep them with her.
Okay.
Richard Gernstein, the prosecutor, claimed that Candy was a dangerous adulterer, capable of seducing and destroying anyone who dared to get involved with her, then proceeded to call a string of witnesses who described Candy's own sexual desires as depraved.
Right.
Some testified that they'd watched Candy embrace Mel while the two were parked in Candy's Lincoln Continental. One woman said she saw them doing the same in Mel's Thunderbird. Quote, they were in each other's arms and they were too passionate for relatives, end quote. A man testified that he saw Candy drive to Mel's trailer sales lot and begin, quote, a hugging and a kissing. end quote, him.
A hugging and a kissing.
They were a hugging and a kissing. The foreman of the Mosslers' ranch recounted that Candy and Mel once showed up there, disappeared inside one of the ranch's trailers, and, quote, rumpled up the bed, end quote.
I like that, rumpled up the bed.
To which Percy reminded the jury they may be affectionate toward one another, but we're not trying a hugging and a kissing case. We're trying a murder case. And one of Mel's co-workers at the trailer lot testified that Mel often bragged, that he could get whatever he wanted from Candy by performing oral sex on her.
Oh, my gosh.
There were a few seconds of stunned silence in the courtroom, and everyone in the courtroom turned to look at Candy and Mel. And according to the reporters, Candy kept a stony face while Mel, quote, smiled sheepishly, end quote.
Oh, my God. Oh, man. Way to go, Mel. Couldn't hide that one.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, geez.
Now, the judge in this trial closed the courtroom to anyone under 21. Not because of Candy and Mel, but because Percy Foreman's principal theory involved Jacques and a spurned homosexual lover. So apparently in 1964, having a homosexual lover was way worse than incest, which is just mind-boggling.
Amazing.
The courtroom was the hottest ticket going. People would bring their lunch so they wouldn't lose their seat. And if somebody got up, the bailiff would go out to the people where they're waiting in line to get in and be like, I got 2 on the aisle.
It's like a club. Jeez.
Prosecutor Gernstein tells the jury that Dade County Sheriff's detectives had interviewed at least 5 men who claimed that Candy and Mel had tried to hire them to kill Jacques. One worked at the gas station where Mel had his car serviced. He testified that Mel asked him to murder Jacques, drive his body to Mexico, and dump him in a volcano. Volcano.
Wow.
Another man, the co-worker at Mel's trailer sales office, testified that when Mel tried to convince him to do the job, Mel had taken a letter opener and made a stabbing motion over and over, demonstrating how he would like Jacques to meet his demise.
Jeez.
I mean, this evidence just piles and piles and piles up against them.
Yeah.
And then there was Billy Frank Mulvey, a thief and, quote, dope addict, end quote, who testified he got a call from Candy asking him to meet her at a Houston beer joint called the 24-Hour Club. And according to Billy Frank's testimony, Candy said she'd heard about him when she had served a term on the Harris County grand jury. And Billy Frank tells Candy, I'll kill Jacques for $25,000. His plan was to rig dynamite to Jacques' car, but he was arrested and thrown into the Harris County jail on another charge before he got around to it.
Oh, man.
In July of 1964, when Mel was arrested for Jacques' murder, he was still in jail and shared a cell with Mel, who he said confessed to him that he had done the killing. Wow. So they just keep bringing these people and show. I mean, it should be a slam dunk.
Sure.
At one point, while Billy Frank was telling his story, Candy comes out of her seat and yells, quote, I have never seen or heard of this man in my life, end quote. Most of the reporters weren't buying what he was selling either. In fact, they were skeptical of all the alleged hitmen. They described them as, quote, shameless and outright rascals, and, quote, nitwits, end quote, who had willingly committed perjury in hopes of getting a reduced prison sentence or at least a free trip.
Wow.
Where they could sunbathe on the beach before coming to court to testify.
Right.
So it was a lot for the jury to take in, and in the end, there was no evidence that connected Candy and Mel to Jacques' death. They couldn't prove that Mel or Candy killed anyone, and the defense, Percy, he never called a witness. Not one witness.
So the blood stains and all that stuff didn't matter?
Nope.
Wow.
During the 3 days of closing arguments, the prosecutors accused the defense of placing everyone on trial but Candy and Mel. Pointing to Candy, Gerstein shouted, quote, she is the mastermind and manipulator of this entire scheme, end quote. He said Candy realized that the only way she could get control of the fortune from Jacques was to, quote, eliminate him from the face of the earth, end quote. Then we get to Percy. Percy Foreman's closing argument lasted 5 hours and had 3 intermissions. He quoted Shakespeare, Wadsworth, H.G. Wells, Buddha, and Jesus. He referred to Mel as, quote, that innocent boy, end quote, and to Candy as, quote, that sweet little woman, end quote. And in a surprise move, he went after the Dade County Sheriff's detectives, claiming, without a shred of evidence, that they had cut deals with Jacques' 4 daughters from his first marriage, and Percy claimed the detectives agreed to manufacture testimony against Candy and Mel in return for a large under-the-table payment from the 4 girls who wanted Candy convicted so they could inherit their father's full estate.
Just throwing everybody under the bus.
When Percy gets to the end of his 5-hour 3 intermission speech, he told the jury to look at Candy, who was clutching a bouquet of flowers. Quote, let him among you without sin cast the first stone, end quote.
Jeez.
Then Percy walked back to the table and took a seat. Testimony lasted 7 weeks, but Candy and Mel, neither one, took the stand. Candy was excused during the trial 4 separate times for nausea, headaches, and faintness, and once Candy had to run out of the courtroom to throw up. And when Percy finds this out later, he tells her, quote, well, you have to get sick in the future, you do it in front of the jury, end quote.
Way to go, Percy.
After 34 days, the case went to jury, and after deliberating for 2 days, the jurors sent a note to Judge Schultz saying, we can't reach a decision. The judge told them to work harder. A day later, Sunday, March 6, 1966, they came back with unanimous verdicts. Candy was dressed in a beige suit and a white coat with gloves and sunglasses. Her face was, quote, chalk white, end quote, according to one reporter. Mel, who was wearing an olive green suit, was staring at the floor. Both Candy Mossler and Mel Powers were declared not guilty.
That's amazing.
Mel leaned back in his chair and whispered, quote, beautiful, end quote.
Wow.
Candy immediately burst into tears, and Mel kissed her on the lips.
Jeez.
And the photographers missed it and started shouting, quote, do it again.
Oh, man.
They didn't. But Candy kissed everybody else. Lawyers, reporters, family members, total strangers. When a reporter asked if Candy and Mel would get married, she'd draw a quote, why no? What makes you think that? End quote. Candy thanked and kissed all the jurors. Mel shook hands with them. One juror looked at Candy and said, quote, God bless you, ma'am, end quote.
Wow.
These two leave the courthouse together in a gold Cadillac convertible while Candy is blowing kisses to the crowd.
Good night.
The editorial page of the Miami Herald described the trial as, quote, a phantasmagoria of sex and slaughter, end quote. This lurid case had all the elements of a sick society raised to the nth power, end quote.
Wow.
Within 8 days of the verdicts, 2 paperback books on the Mossler case were published, but that's not where this story ends. Candy and Mel returned to Houston and openly lived together at the Houston estate. Candy had an 8-foot wall stone fence built around the home. Now, her neighbors aren't too pleased she's staying where she's staying.
Right.
They stopped inviting her to parties and avoided the events she hosted. According to the Houston socialite Joanne Herring, quote, please, I wasn't about to be seen standing next to that hedonist. She was a murderer. She had sex with her sister's son. I don't know which was worse, end quote. But Candy wasn't going anywhere. She started running Jacques' businesses. She bought real estate, invested in theater productions. She founded a music company to publish and promote the love songs she said she had been writing for the past few years to help manage her stress. Is that what you do, honey? Do you write songs to manage your stress?
No, I do that so we can keep the lights on.
So we can eat. She even said that Judy Garland was interested in recording some of her songs. All with Mel by her side. She takes him to important social events. On a trip to Switzerland, Mel supposedly bought Candy an engagement ring, but she insisted that they were not romantically involved. She loved him like she loved all of her relatives. She rarely saw him because she had her own busy career as a commercial property developer. On his own, Mel had been collecting real estate, and he's doing pretty well. So well, he's tired of Candy, who is getting older. Mel said Candy had a crazy streak. He said she was unpredictable and had a fiery temper, and he wasn't sure what she would do if she found out he'd been seeing and sleeping with another woman.
Uh-oh.
But Candy's already suspicious that Mel's cheating on her. She gets really upset with him when she thought that he was ogling a waitress, and then she called the police and demanded that he be arrested for hitting her, quote, about the head and face with his hands, end quote. But there was no evidence that he'd laid a finger on her. Then Candy hired a private detective in Houston to follow Mel around and see what he was up to. A few days after she tries to get him arrested, Mel and Candy get into another argument at Candy's home. She went into the bedroom, he shut the door and walked over to the sink, and then Candy shot through the door 3 times with a gun.
Jeez.
Mel never filed any charges, but that was the end of the relationship. It ended with gunfire.
You think? Wow.
I read for a while Mel became kind of Houston's Hugh Hefner. He grew out his hair long, grew a thick mustache. I've got a picture of this. And he frequented TGI Fridays, which at the time was a popular singles bar, wearing white-collared shirts and custom-made jeans with leather stitching around the cuffs. I mean, girls, how could you resist?
Yeah. I guess it's better than Applebee's.
But Candy was out having a good time, too. When she gave herself a birthday party, she brought in Chuck Berry as the musical guest.
Wow.
And apparently at this party, when Candy introduces Chuck Berry, she plants a huge wet tongue kiss on him in front of the crowd.
Whoa.
And in fact, years later in 1987, in Chuck Berry's autobiography, he devotes an entire chapter to his multiple flings with Candy, describing in detail their sexual encounters on her circular bed.
Oh, man.
Go, Chuck.
Yeah.
But Candy's gonna marry again. In 1971, she marries Barnett Garrison, a self-employed electrical contractor who owned a few local nightclubs. He's a big guy, 6'4", 220 pounds. He's 32. She's somewhere in between 51 and 53 years old.
Okay.
Barnett and Candy are happy enough until Candy learned that Barnett frequented a little nightclub that had go-go dancers. And one night after the club closed, it mysteriously burned to the ground.
Wow.
The Houston Fire Department suspected that Candy set fire to the place.
Jeez.
They didn't have evidence to arrest her, and the story never made it into the newspaper. But when Candy is asked by a Houston Post Society columnist years later if she had started the fire, Candy waved her hand in the air and said, quote, "I certainly would understand doing such a thing," end quote. I mean, just say you did it, Candy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In August of 1972, just a little more than a year after she marries Barnett, he's found face down in a pool of blood on the stone patio of the Mossler mansion. A 9mm automatic pistol, which he carried in a zipper case, was beside him. One of his shoes was also beside him. The other was in the yard. He was barely alive. He suffered brain damage, a collapsed lung, broken ribs, and lacerations to his head. Police officers noticed there were scuff marks on the steep slate roof of the 3-story house, and they believed he'd fallen off of it 40 feet to the patio.
Wow.
Detectives want to interview Candy, but she's in her bedroom with the door locked, and at first she refused to open it, but she finally allowed the detectives into the bedroom. But she was drugged up and drunk. She mumbled that she didn't have any idea why Barnett was on the roof, and at one point in the interview, she said, quote, "I already shot him, but Barnett hadn't been shot."
Jeez.
Yeah, I already shot him.
I guess she was drunk.
Yeah. His fall is going to be ruled accidental, but there's another version of the story. One of Candy's relatives said Candy paid men to beat up Barnett after she discovered he was cheating on her.
Okay.
Candy hired 2 of her cousins from Georgia, quote, "big mean rednecks who drove bootleg liquor over state lines," end quote. She wanted them to come to Houston and teach Barnett a lesson, and that led to Barnett getting thrown off the roof. Another story is that they beat him up, but he wouldn't go unconscious, so they ice-picked him in the ear and then threw him off the roof.
Ooh.
Barnett went to Houston Methodist Hospital, where he was in a coma, and after 6 weeks, he regained enough memory to recall that he had graduated from Rice University, but he didn't know Candy from Adam, and he didn't remember falling off the roof. And when doctors said they couldn't do anything else for him, his parents took him in and took custody and care of him, not his wife, Candy.
Wow.
Candy filed for divorce in March of 1974, telling reporters that she still loved Barnett, but there was no way that the marriage could last because his mother refused to let her see him. Well, he's not living with you, Candy.
Yeah.
She says she had no choice. She just had to move on. And Candy keeps on dating a country music singer, a member of the Drifters R&B group, a prominent doctor at Texas Medical Center, Sammy Davis Jr., a Houston television anchor.
Wow. She's making the rounds.
She makes the rounds. In 1973, two of Candy's adopted sons, Dan and Chris, who were students at the University of Texas, accused their mom of converting large portions of their trust funds to herself and just giving them $350 a month for living expenses. And when these two boys come forward, it was pretty clear Candy's happy fairy tale household in Texas was far from what she wanted people to believe, because Dan and Chris tell the reporters that their mom would get high on prescription drugs and didn't know what she was doing and would tell outrageous lies. To clean up her reputation, Candy decided to have her biography written. She hired Mickey Herskowitz to put it together for her. It never materialized.
Yeah.
Mickey says that he was unable to verify much of what Candy said. She said that she suffered from polio as a child in one instance.
What?
However, there were no medical records to indicate that that was true. Another example was that she claimed Jacques doctored her birth certificate to avoid people realizing how big the age difference was between the two of them,
Man.
and that she was actually born in 1927. When she was confronted with the fact that she would have been 12 years old when Norman Jr. was born, Candy grew angry. Candy's last interview was to a reporter named Mark Goodman, a writer for Esquire. He attended a party Candy threw at her mansion in early 1976. And I'm going to tell you what he wrote, but I need a little background music for this, honey. And what's the point of having an Emmy-nominated composer in the house if you can't do this?
Okay, hang on. Ready?
Uh-huh. Suddenly, at the stroke of 1 a.m., the lights dim to an intimate cocktail room glow. The band tones down to a low background thrum, and a spotlight sweeps dramatically to the hall staircase. Then through the eerie gauze of cigarette smoke, a tiny, curvaceous blonde figurine begins to glide down the staircase, a la Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. As she descends amid the tintinnabulation of cymbals and ruffle of drums, the glittering band leader breathlessly announces, quote, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Candy Mossler," end quote. That was very good, honey. Very good.
There you go.
In October 1976, 3 months after the Esquire article was published, Candy flew from Houston to Miami to attend a bank board of directors meeting. She checked into a suite at the Fontainebleau Hotel and called her Miami doctor, because she's got a doctor everywhere, apparently, telling him she had a violent headache. He came to the hotel and injected her with Demerol and Phenergan. And the following morning, October 26, 1976, Candy was face down in one of the 5 pillows on her king-size bed, dead. She was wearing a peach pink nightgown and a full face of makeup. I wouldn't expect anything less of her.
Yeah.
The autopsy showed that Candy died from postural asphyxia caused by sedatives and her face-down sleeping position. She smothered herself to death after she took too many drugs.
Wow.
The doctor had given her these drugs, but he didn't know she had taken Placidil tablets before he even arrived. It also revealed something else. Her death did. Candy Mossler had been abusing drugs for a very long time, just like her sons said. The medical examiner of Dade County, Ronald Wright, said she had, quote, thousands and thousands of needle pricks in her butt from years of drug injections.
Wow.
Also, Candy wasn't 59, as she told her family, or 44 or 50 like she told others. Birth records indicate that she was born in 1914, and she died at the age of 62. 2. So she was telling people, I'm only 50, and she was 62.
Jeez.
More than 100 people attended a memorial service for Candy at Riverside Memorial Chapel on Miami Beach, the same chapel in which Jacques Mossler's funeral was held 12 years before. Mel Powers came to pay his respects. He was accompanied by a shapely blonde. And now, 61 years, just this week, 61 years later, just this week, no one's been held accountable for Jacques Mossler's murder.
Man.
But according to the Dade County Police and the prosecution, who've long since died off or retired, they actually found the killer. But the killer wasn't found guilty. As for Mel, he didn't stay out of trouble. He was sued a few times. He wrecked a helicopter trying to go under a bridge. Remember, his dad owned that aviation company.
Yeah.
He died in 2010 of pneumonia, and he never spoke publicly about his affair with Aunt Candy. I read that Mel was a Kardashian before the internet, which I thought was appropriate, apropos. But did he do it? Did he kill Jacques? Most say yes. There were reporters who did stories about him who said that the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees when Mel walked in. He was eerie to be around. And at the courthouse, he freaked out a prospective juror by just being in the same elevator with her. She ended up in the hospital after riding in the elevator with him.
Really?
She was that afraid.
Wow.
But that is the story of the murder of Jacques Mossler. Did Mel do it? Did Candy plan it? And that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kywolf project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
Well, here's my take on the whole thing. I mean, I don't know how they could have found her and him not guilty with all the evidence. I mean, did the jury get paid off? That's what I want to know.
I think they were just charmed. I think they had like 77 jurors come in. There was one woman, but there were no women. There were no women to be like, she had her husband killed. Yeah. And it was just all these men. And since they tried them together, they didn't want Candy to go to jail. And so Mel got off too. I
think they got paid off.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do.
Maybe. It's a possibility. I mean, who knows? It was the 60s and, Percy. I mean, there's so many personalities in this story. It's just, it's hard to even, fathom it. There was a movie made about this. There are a couple books about it, but the Lord broke the mold when he made Candy.
Well, let's move on from these two dummies to a bunch of other dummies with Bless Your Heart.
Well, bless your heart.
Okay, number one, being up for the occasion.
Okay.
All right. According to reports, a 77-year-old Florida man is accused of trying to hawk $1,800 worth of black market erectile dysfunction drugs. Reginald Reggie Kinser originally bought a slew of ED products, including, and I don't know how this is pronounced, Snovitra 20, Velitra 20, and Carmagra oral jelly with the intent to sell them locally and outside the Sunshine State, according to federal court papers. It's not Kinser's first legal rodeo. He's been busted for possession of more traditional drugs like marijuana and cocaine in the past. So, he's being creative, right?
Well, there was something in Mel's autopsy. I'm not going to say what it is, but that was a good story for it.
Okay. All right. Number 2, Te Quiero Taco Bell.
Okay.
Patricia Williams from Nixa, Missouri, has been arrested and charged with first-degree arson.
Did she burn down a Taco Bell?
Not quite. According to a report, fire department officials say Williams set fire to a home by pouring gasoline on some clothes and then lighting a spicy tortilla chip, tossing the chip into the clothes and letting the flames do their thing.
Is that a thing? I might have read somewhere that you can light Fritos on fire.
Yeah, exactly. That's how, if you're out in the woods, you can just use Fritos to start fires. The 3 people in the house were able to escape unharmed, thankfully, but we know what you're really thinking. Why a tortilla chip?
Yeah.
Police say Williams admitted to starting the fire, and she allegedly used Tacos tortilla chips because she knew they would support combustion because of their grease content.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. So if you're ever out and you need to start a campfire,
get you some tortilla chips or some Fritos.
Yeah, grab a bag of Fritos and you're all set. All right, number 3 and finally. I'll keep an eye out for you.
Okay.
According to reports, 44-year-old Sandra Jimenez stabbed her boyfriend in the eye.
I love it when you use your accent.
Police were called to the hospital where the boyfriend told them his girlfriend stabbed him in the eye with their dog's rabies needles.
What?
The stabbing occurred while in the middle of an argument about him looking at other women.
Oh, my gosh.
The victim reported that he was laying on the couch when Jimenez jumped on him and stabbed him. She then left the residence when she realized what she had done.
I bet she did.
Yeah, the couple had been together for over 8 years, and this has been an ongoing argument between the two.
Okay.
When the officers arrived to arrest her, she was found sleeping outside in a car.
Oh, my gosh.
Yep.
Did he lose his eye?
No, I guess not. But, yeah. So I guess he won't be looking at other women now.
Ba-dum-bum.
Oh, jeez.
Now I know where you were going with that.
Thank you.
Bless his heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, all you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Do it.
That is my amazing husband out there.
That's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.